Sabina Abdullayeva, Kolbe or Kolbe, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right. Kolbe, it's Kolbe, like cheese with Junkin, okay. And Suzanne Reed, okay. But of course, Margarita, Domesticating the Modernist novel for the small screen. I should tell you that as a chair, I tend to be a Stalinist, 20 minutes tops. You're not sure.
Are we ready?
Yes, one.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for humoring us students. Playing scholars. Bortko's Master and Margarita, Domesticating the Modernist novel for the small screen. Contemporary Russian television is miles away from its Soviet ancestor. In the proliferation of global formats and genres, in commercial priorities, and even in its ideological agenda. One feature of continuity is the multitude of television adaptations of literary classics. Beginning with Vladimir Bortko's 2003 The Idiot, major television channels have produced several dozen TV versions of Russian and Soviet literary works. The co-optation of the mini-series format, which in Soviet times translated into многосерийный художественный film, and the sheer quantity of these quality television products seems to suggest a certain agenda at work. In the early Soviet tradition of literary adaptations, film served as a tool for reaching the masses that were either illiterate or considered not literate enough to grasp the meaning of difficult works. In modern Russia, filmed adaptations of literature can be seen as a way for high culture to compete with the commercialized visual media of television, cinema, and the internet. But this is too abstract. Who is competing? Surely Mikhail Afanasyevich himself is not trying to woo viewers away from watching the Russian version of The Nanny. In the case of Vladimir Bortko's 2005 serial adaptation of Master and Margarita, we argue that reviving Bulgakov's work for television is motivated by an agenda of constructing/reconstructing national heritage for the state-inspired project of nation building. Two particular strategies of the miniseries indicate that it is affected by the official ideological discourse propagated by the state-controlled media. First, it establishes continuity with Soviet culture, both televisual and literary. Continuity with the past, one of the main components of nation building, implicitly legitimates and naturalizes the established order, and heals the trauma of the presumably ruptured historical tradition. Cultural continuity with the past is an especially important component of forging national identity for post-Soviet Russia, which, in its submission to American cultural imperialism, fell from the top of the crumbling communist structure. Second, the series neutralizes the novel's subversive discourse by deliberately distancing the modern state and its natural and legitimate loci of authority from Bulgakov's contemporary narrative. Thus, in Bortko's adaptation, the celebrated individual voice of the modernist and ironic author yields power to a higher authority, the fabled heritage of a nation. By appropriating Bulgakov's Master and Margarita for the nation-building project of a monolithic state, the subversive discourses of the source novel are in turn monologized. For a methodological model of this paper, we draw on Robert Stant's idea that the film adaptation manifests intertextual dialogism. He contends that the adaptation results from, quote, a series of operations, selection, popularization, and reculturalization, end quote. We try to avoid a traditional discussion of adaptation as the quest for fidelity to the single source, the original literary work. Instead, we view Bortko's television adaptation as a visual text maintaining intertextual links to multiple authoritative discourses, the discourse of authorship, the discourse of celebrity, the discourse of temporality, that bypass the novelistic discourse and lay bare the myth of the divine state where, in Nancy Conde's words, quote, titular ethnicity sustains strong imperial and military traditions on the basis of enduring moral authority, end quote. To prove our claim, we examine two features of Bortko's miniseries. One, the chronotope of the series, and two, its use of authorial and star iconography. We argue that stylistic and casting choices made by the producers of Master and Margarita are symptomatic of contemporary Russian national and political concerns. Bortko redefines the role of the author in the text. If the novel celebrates the modernist author as the demiurge responsible for the creation of a highly ambiguous and playful narrative structure, the miniseries celebrates above all the television channel, and tangentially the state, as the author that is capable of bringing to its viewers a big-budget, technologically sophisticated adaptation with claims to high culture fidelity. The opening sequence of each episode starts with the logo of the Channel Russia and the Russian Federation's tricolor as part of this logo, then cuts to the Central Partnership logo, the media holding behind the production, and only then cuts to the portrait of the novel's author. The introductory credits link the television channel with key national symbols, such as the Federation's flag, and with the canonical novel and its famous author. The sequence, via editing, asserts the continuity between the writer's legacy and the national symbols of present-day Russia. The connection legitimates the modern-day Russian Federation as a spiritual heir to the great literary culture. While Bulgakov does not privilege any of his narrative lines, but in fact plays on their mutual penetration, Bortko provides a clear hierarchy. The diegetic world of the film opens with a shot from the Roman era, which holds both a spiritual and spectacular value. The chalice breaks spilling wine or blood. The important thing is that it is red and digitally enhanced. Then comes the documentary black and white footage of Moscow of the 1930s, the petty and passé empire. So we're going to watch the intro here. Post-Soviet artistic community and cinematic tradition. For the role of Pontius Pilate, Bortko chose Kirill Lavrov, a Soviet-era star who in the good old days played leading Soviet managers and scholars, including the ultimate engineer of human souls, Vladimir Lenin. In post-Soviet days, Lavrov switched to playing the godfathers of the new Russia. While Lenin-looking Pilate runs Jerusalem, the other key Soviet-era star, Oleg Basilashvili, was chosen to play Woland, and by doing so to run Moscow. Who will help these two veterans to run the world if not the young and famous Sergei Bezrukov, who, to quote Paulina Barskova, plays Jesus, quote, with robust enthusiasm and not without some sunny optimism, end quote. Having recently touched Russia's soul as the gangster boss in the brigade, in Master and Margarita, Bezrukov sacrifices himself for the entire world and receives the baton from Pilate, who used to run a province of the pagan Rome, to run the divine state. Perhaps this is the contemporary Russia where imperial ambitions are not in contradiction with Christian faith. While the entire world still tries to resolve a 2,000-year-old conflict between Pilate and Christ, Bezrukov and Lavrov resolve it and also establish a continuity between the ways power is represented as theocracy in Soviet and post-Soviet cinema and television. Just as Bulgakov's authorship is reduced to the opening portrait, so does the writer's alter ego, the master, pale in comparison with other voices of authority in the series. Alexander Galibin, an important but second-tier actor, gives up the center stage to two gerontocratic stars, Lavrov and Basilashvili, and the new star, Bezrukov. Moreover, while Galibin incarnates the master in the film's diegesis, he does not give the protagonist his voice. Bortko decided to ask Bezrukov to provide voices for both Yeshua and the Master, a decision that enforces ideological monologism rather than polyphony in the serial's diegesis. Bortko's interpretation goes further to remove the threat that Bulgakov's subversive discourse poses to any modern authoritative establishment. The most obvious effect on the series is the lack of playfulness and ambiguity. Lavrov, who during filming was pushing 80, can only assert his authority as Pilate with the long, dramatic pauses afforded exclusively to people who have reached that age. Woland is played by an old, serious, and authoritative Basilashvili, not the spry trickster and provocateur Lyet that most readers of the novel imagine. While such a slow pace and serious tone might be appropriate for scenes in Yerushalayim,